we started with founders. We started with founders that were on rocket ship companies, and we're going to end with founders that are on rocket ship companies. I saw Peter Dixon in this room about 6 or 7 years ago, and he was working on Second Front, and I think Brandon was actually here. I'm like, this is cobwebs. It might have even been about 8 or 9 years ago, and they're like, oh, we're building Second Front. I'm like, Second Front? What's Second Front? And they're like, oh, we're going to help companies work with the Department of Defense, and we're going to help companies work with government agencies. And I'm like, nah, that's not going to work. I didn't say that, of course, but I was like, really? I mean, such smart, capable people working on such an impossible problem? Like, are you all really going to make it? And with each year, I'm like, wait a second, expanding headcount, and then like I see them raise venture money. I'm like, wow. And so what did I learn there? I learned, A, I don't know anything. B, a lot of investors don't know anything. And C, founders lead the way. And so what's really interesting is Peter has been in this journey of defense tech and dual use, and he's been probably one of the main leaders for why defense tech and dual use has really blossomed over the past few years. Second Front enables companies like OneBrief and all the defense tech dual use companies you know to really grow and scale with DoD. And so it's fascinating to hear him talk about his beginning and journey and where he is now. The other fascinating individual we have here is Jack Jeremy Harris. So what's really interesting about Infinite Tactics is it is a company that has not relied on much venture funding. So similar to Second Front early in the days, very crafty, scrappy, and relying on customer funding. And Jack sits at the intersection of high-powered computing, AI, and the government. And last but not least, TJ, I've known for many years, and it's awesome to see him be an incredible salesman. When I first met him, I was like, you're doing sales? Interesting. And what he's proved is that veterans, if they can sell and build, are unstoppable. So I'm really excited about this session. And right after this session, we're also going to announce the PenFed competition winners. TJ, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Really excited to bring this home today on defense and dual use. I think the timing is prescient for defense and dual use. It is clear that we have a couple things happening right now. We have a continuing evolution of the nature of conflict, the nature of war. We have a new administration now driving incentives and priorities in the Department of Defense and broader federal government, undergirded by pretty significant technology adoption, both in commercial and in government space. And really excited to see commercial technology now have a little bit of a stronger play in public sector and government. But real quick, I'll add just a little bit to the introduction for Peter and Jack here. Peter, who I've known for many years now, former boss, still kind of currently my boss, but Marine ground intel officer, early days working across Iraq, Afghanistan, Mexico, early innovation at the State Department, parlayed into one of the first folks at DIUX and AFWorks as they built out their first business plan and launched a little over 10 years ago. Also co-founder of a organization called With Honor, which has now pushed or supported, I believe, 36 veterans elected to Congress. And then, of course, co-founder at Second Front, now the chairman of the board at Second Front. Peter, you do many amazing things. Jack, obviously CEO here and co-founder and CTO, I believe, at Infinite Tactics. PhD in cognitive and computer science. Really exciting work you guys are doing. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about your founder journey and how you came across Peter as a serial entrepreneur, multiple companies, multiple projects. Jack, how did you get into Infinite Tactics, and how did you take a problem that you saw in the Air Force and turn that into a real business?
Go ahead. Sure. Thanks a lot. Well, of course, the journey started as being in the military, like everybody else who's a veteran here, and I got a unique experience getting to start right before we had 9/11, and then as a young officer, getting to go through that, being in charge of networks and circuits and how to support secure operations at MacDill Air Force Base, which the CENTCOM was running out. Had unique experience there. We'll just kind of shortcut some of that into later on civil service and getting to learn how to do research labs and everything and how that SIBRs worked and how I didn't like how they worked at the time. Wanted to jump out to start a business immediately because I saw tech and I was adding tech that we could add into it to solve problems, add into the defense space. But it takes more than a good idea. I learned in the process of evaluating these companies, and which I was doing a lot of evaluations for, it takes a team, it takes accolades, and a business plan. And I didn't have any of those at the time, so I transitioned a little bit later on, grad school, and then I started my own business, working in the area of large-scale cognitive science workflows on DoD supercomputers. That was built off of after doing something in the Air Force. In the Air Force, as a civil servant, I created the world's largest virtual supercomputer for cognitive science, doing modeling and simulation, and that in 50 cents got me a Coke. And that inspired me to say, it's time. CTO of the Air Force, great, and I'm ready to go to try to find out how I can capitalize on this and make an impact larger than what I could inside the fence. I'm very proud of all my military time, very proud of my civil service time. I'm extremely proud of my company and being able to start that up. And that was a bootstrapped effort where you start hiring in your first people. And I can tell you that as a founder, or I would like to call it just a small business owner, nothing drives you to pray more than that, because you're inviting other people into your adventure. And that's a big risk. So you got to find the right people to do that. And I did. Had my first hire here with me. He was a Marine. And Marines are fearless, so he jumped right in. And we built in from that over on. And that's where Infinite Tactics got bootstrapped. And I'll talk more about what the company is later, I guess, but that was where the journey began.
Yeah, maybe helpful for me to understand a little bit who's in the audience here. So just do me a favor. If you're an investor, raise your hand. Okay. If you are at a company that is currently selling to the federal government as a dual-use tech company, selling commercial and government. If you're just defense tech, you just sell primarily to the military or government, raise your hand. Okay. If you would like to sell to the US government but don't currently, raise your hand.
Yeah, okay,
and then if you are like, all right, this is interesting, but I do something totally in the commercial sector and I will never sell to the US government, I'm just a veteran, raise your hand. Cool. Okay. Thank you. Super helpful. So, for I think us at Second Front, we're a public benefit corporation like Etsy or Patagonia, and what we did was we were really early on. Basically, Palantir had been before us in terms of trying to jump the valley of death. But that was, and when I was in uniform, I wrote the urgent need statement to help them do that. But that was really it. There was no other examples of companies that had been successful. And so, as a veteran, I think we all understand that just in terms of how bad the technology that we had access to was compared to the technology in our private lives and how frustrating that was. In fact, there's a movement in the Pentagon in recent years called Fix Our Computers, right? Because it's like a hashtag, because their computers take 40 minutes to turn on, and frankly, very little of it works, right? Despite the billions and billions of dollars that are being spent. So when I started doing the counter-cartel work, I was working with DARPA and In-Q-Tel, and I went, frankly, to the first In-Q-Tel CEO Summit. Has anybody been to that In-Q-Tel CEO Summit? I mean, it's awesome, right? But I was walking around like a kid on Christmas morning looking at all of this tech that had been modified by the CIA for national security use. And it was amazing but frustrating, because none of it was ending up in the hands of my lance corporals, right? And so for me, the real thing was figuring out, how do I close that last mile of tech transition to get capability into the hands of, our young Marines, right? Our soldiers, sailors, airmen. And so people always say that you need authenticity as part of your founder journey or anything like that. You really don't. right? You just need to have a good team and be smart and capable and all those things, unless you're taking a really big swing and trying to change an entire industry, which is what we did. And if you're doing that, if you're trying to achieve something that is borderline impossible, you didn't have a bad read, right? You had the right read. We were just too stubborn, right, to not do it. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to crawl over broken glass for years, you have to be true believers. And so you have to pick something that you are truly, authentically passionate about, come hell or high water, and you're willing to tie yourself to the mast. And so that's for us what we did at Second Front. We've all been very successful as a result of that, but ultimately that's not why we did it. We did it because we were pissed off that we, as the country that was spending more than the next 9 countries combined on our military, had the same capability in Afghanistan and Iraq that our father's generation had in Vietnam. And what the fuck, right? So that's why we did it.
Well said. A topic that we've covered, I think a good parlay here, quite a bit over the last couple of days, but talk about fundraising. And I think that's the first thing that we all go to. If you've got a product, you've got an idea, you want to build a go-to-market, you want to build a team. There's a lot of venture capitalists in here that have been around for the last 2 days. There's equity financing. But before you kind of jump to fundraising, you guys both have backgrounds in bootstrapping businesses from the start. So talk about how you approach capital structure and how you approach effectively financing that 0 to 1 period in the business.
0 to 1 is the hardest. The next hardest is 1 to 2. And the same thing is when you're hiring your first people. It is very much the same thing I was talking about, the drive and pray kind of thing, because it was doubling the amount of income that it would normally take to just fund yourself. So we basically did not take any venture capital. We didn't take any angel money. We didn't even take a loan. So this was a way we ended up bankrolling it by taking in contracts right off the bat, and we were a services company to begin with. Now, services company does not mean dual use very well, and we're on a dual use, so you'll see we changed along the way. But the services is what we bootstrapped it with. Those services allowed us to make good money working for contracting with our expertise, which was one person too, and then building technology, which we did not own that tech at the very beginning. You cannot do that later on. IP matters a lot. But to get the tech base, which is personal tech base, where we have people, we had to have those assets. We were able to do that through services. And working through DARPA, we're working through Air Force Research Labs and the DoD supercomputing centers. One contract, we got the next contract, and that was then a facility security clearance. And then the infrastructure was in place that, wait, we can now have more overhead going to our product that we maintain 100% ownership over. So that's the methodology we went. I do want to make one comment though. There's more than one playbook. And sometimes the playbooks work right for one person, and you can do the exact same playbook and it doesn't work for someone else. So you have to really take everything with a grain of salt, including that.
Yeah, everyone talks about fail fast in Silicon Valley, right? Or VC, you hear VCs talk about fail fast a lot of times. I mean, what does that actually mean? It means you're looking for the companies in your portfolio that are going to 10x, right? And if your company's falling, if your portfolio company is falling below that curve, you know, they're switching out the CRO, switching out the CEO, and then pretty quick they're shooting that company in the head and moving on, right? Not going to spend any more resources on it. And so once you start taking venture capital, you need to be ready to go up and to the right. If you're a defense tech company, there are things that can't be rushed, right? In terms of having your tickets, having your contracts, having your permissions to operate. You need all those things in place, right? Some of them can be accelerated if you're smart and savvy and use somebody like Second Front to get your authority to operate. But a lot of things just take a certain amount of time. And it doesn't matter, you know, if you're rebellion and you raise, you know, crap ton of money, it doesn't help you get there any faster. Those things take what they take. And so it's very dangerous if you raise venture capital with venture capital expectations and you don't already have your ducks in a row, right? I will also say that there are now a number of organizations that will help you from a defense tech or a dual use perspective. Get ready. So for those of you who are kind of thinking about or in that space, and I think that this will be kind of proof positive of the point I'm going to make here. There are, just a level set, 160 different innovation organizations within the Department of Defense. We'll see what happens after DOGE, right? But right now, there are a lot, okay? Because every general and admiral who recognized that the acquisition system was broken set up their own petting zoo. Most of them without authorities or contracting officers or even mission ownership. And those things have just persisted, right? Because it's the government. They don't have to show a viable business model. So those now create a forest of mirrors that is really hard for companies to navigate. So if you know of, right, 2 or 3 companies that have gotten funded from Army Futures Command, raise your hand. Okay, 1 hand. 2 or 3 companies from Naval X that have gotten funded. No hands. One. Okay, 2. How about AFWorks? Okay. In-Q-Tel? Okay. Defense Innovation Unit. Okay, there's your answer. There are 3 front doors that you want to go to. AFWorks, DIU, In-Q-Tel, right? If you do things right, you have about a 1 in 3 chance with all of those. If you do something kinetic, special operations. If you do something with AI, CDAO, mostly because they'll give you a fast contract. Other than that, unless you have some sort of hookup or in, don't. Just don't. Don't take the meeting, because there's always another one. Stop, right? And that's the biggest advice that I can give you, because the fact that some Navy SEAL admiral slaps the table and says that your thing is the greatest thing since sliced bread and he needs it, and you go out and fundraise against that or hire against that, you will go bankrupt. Do not do that, right? Only those 3 places.
Well said. I think what we're getting after here is like really all of the core infrastructure components to a defense or dual use go-to-market strategy. You can't engage technology with the Department of Defense or broader public sector without your facilities clearance, your DD-254s. And we touched a little bit on SIBRs and these front doors and pathways to effectively is non-dilutive R&D capital to build your product. So if you're a dual use company and you're selling both commercially and to the government, how do you think about a go-to-market strategy in that 0 to 1 moment? There are pathways where you start in government first, you get non-dilutive capital, you can build your product to an MVP and a beta. There are also pathways where you bring your product to commercial markets first. You can do both at the same time. What are your thoughts on broader go-to-market strategies? What have you executed? What worked? What hasn't worked?
Well, to go to market, you have to have something to go to market with. So I think it might be a good transition to talk about the product we brought to market. So why we had a problem. First, there's a problem that you have to figure out what you want to solve. And our biggest one is we could not bring tech. And when I talk tech, it's like applications to the DoD and run them on the networks. I don't know if you've ever been on an Air Force network. You can't install crap. And no one can. And how can I bring in the latest large language model? And at the time, the latest TensorFlow. You couldn't, even on the DoD supercomputers, you couldn't do this at speed. So we had to figure out how to do that. And that was what initialized some technology we called, at the time, the Analytics Hub. But we didn't do that for the DoD first. We did it for commercial, because the healthcare industry has the same problem. They need to be able to bring in technology and apply data analytics on healthcare data. And we were consolidating all the healthcare records for the city of Dayton and running on our platform. Pretty cool. But now we want to try to transition this into someone who wants to spend money on the security aspect, and can we start bringing it to dual use? And we use the SIBR program. Thank you, Peter, for the AFWorks, because AFWorks did kind of transition to a rapid prototyping phase. And we did, though. We'd already spent the money to own the IP of the core technology that we wanted. Now, what the terminology is used in this world is putting on the green paint, so that the DoD can acquire tech that's already existing in the commercial space. So we're talking about bringing it from commercial over to DoD, but it isn't ready. The same problems that we were talking about before, you couldn't run these new tech on Air Force networks, you won't be able to run our tech on Air Force networks. So we had to get through a base application that was acceptable, full NIST 800-171 compliance, easy front door for being able to bring in new technology, get approvals through AOs, approval authorities, and all that we got funded through SIBR. The Delta was getting the approval. And that was really a good thing for us, because all that extra stuff helped evolve the product, a product that can be used commercially now, too, and now is extremely valuable to the DoD, because I heard before, how do you bring a large language model into the DoD with open source? You can just drop it on our platform in 2 minutes, and you have Ollama running. You couldn't do Ollama before last month because of licensing restrictions, and now we're seeing the Facebooks and say they're backing off. They'll let you use their models. You can even put DeepSeek on there. We have that in one. I'm not recommending doing that, but Mixtral's great, and you can just prop that in, and it can power DoD warfighters to leverage the latest tools, and tools that others have produced can produce in this room, can come on our platform, and boom, without having to go through the same pain we did, it just drop it in. So anyway, that was our pathway. Pathway to SIBR was leveraged, and ensuring prior to going down that route that we have IP established. And there you go.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with both of our companies is and we were talking about this a little bit, it's not like two different sides of the same coin in terms of the models that we're both pursuing. I think you can almost look at what we're each not doing, right? What a lot of other people are. And so if you look around at the defense tech space, right, and the valuations in it compared to the contract value, and I know there are a lot of true believers in the defense tech space, and it's going to keep going forever. My personal belief is it's going to be a bloodbath, right? And that there's going to be an absolute reckoning, because you had a bunch of VCs that don't understand defense tech at all, that when crypto failed, they just took their crypto funds and rolled it right into defense tech, right? Because it's counter-cyclical. That's going to be really ugly, because if you look at the exits, there have been, what do you guys think? 30, 40 exits in defense tech, right? It's less than 10. Less than 10. And most of those were razor's edge things where they sort of astroturfed it. So it's not a lot, and certainly not for big numbers or big multiples. And so the defense tech leaders trade at 20x forward, right, in terms of raising money. Their natural acquirers, the defense primes, right, trade at 7x EBITDA. Right. It's a huge delta. And in fact, most of the primes, because they are doing cost plus models, they have their profit capped at 8% profit and 4% additional internal R&D on top of that, 12%. So if you come in and you get acquired by Raytheon or Northrop for 20x, right? When you get acquired, you then go into the 7x EBITDA model that the analyst gives them, right? Palantir and Leidos did a partnership, and they put out a press release together. And the way that they described their company at the end of that press release, it was almost identical. But one trades at 7x EBITDA, and one trades at 20x forward. And so if you are a defense tech company and you're focused on this, you got to be figuring out what your exit strategy is, right? And you need to be thinking about that now. Now, because of, interestingly not Palantir, because of Anduril, defense is opening up the top echelon of defense contractors right now, but they are only going to do it for companies that have reached scale. So if you have carved out some niche or some great capability, right, and you are surviving on pilot and prototype money from the DoD, by the way, that's about a $3 billion non-reoccurring pot of money, right? That is wholly disconnected from the $240 billion up for grabs, reoccurring, programmatic, right, and PEO-driven work, which is allocated by Congress. So if you're a viable defense tech company and you do not have a program of record and you are not selling by, with, and through Congress, you are not actually a viable defense tech company. And so my biggest message to you is start looking for who you're going to join. Because, and if you know your defense history, for the defense tech ecosystem, it is last supper time. And it's last supper time today.
Yeah, this was a great topic. Tim brought up actually earlier this week that there's obviously been a large influx of investment really early stage in defense tech and dual use and hard tech and deep tech problems. Is this a structural moment or is this a cyclical moment? There's a really healthy discussion around this. But as we talk about scale for these companies, how do you define scale? And how do you get from these front doors, you get from prototyping efforts, SIBRs, even some legitimate contracts with the right colors of money, into programs of record, into PEOs, the transition from the front door to the program office? How do you execute that?
I can give an example. I can't say this is the only way to do it. So where we went from the prototyping to a program of record that's coming out for our project is actually performing. You have to be able to perform. You have to transition from saying, here's a demonstration from time and materials to this is a licensing product that you can do something. And you honestly have to be aligned with a senior leader's goals. So a senior leader needed something. He saw that, what, you want to build this? We already did it. And so it turned into how do they get at scale, and then they want to do 40 million palms and stuff like that. So with that, though, who you partner was a great thing. You kind of do have to play with primes, and I don't believe their money accounting personally when they say they only make 7%. Well, I'll tell you why I don't believe it over a beer sometime, but they make more money than you think. But actually, you kind of need them at the beginning before you can be your own prime. And actually, the SIBR program does provide a way for you to be your own prime as well. And that's really nice when you go from a simple prototyping, which is phase ones, and they're nothing. They're just basically get proof of concept to get someone to do phase two. It's really if you can get aligned with the warfighter and not the user, a buyer. And I think you were making that point a minute ago. That, hey, that's great. You have a colonel banging the door. This is great. If they don't have a budget, they're not your buyer. But we need aligned with that. You can get what's a phase 3, and that's a $100 million ceiling. That's game changing for phase 3s. And that's not always that. It's whatever your core's top limit is, but it's almost always what they go for is that high. So you can capitalize not one time, 2 times, 3 times over that same technology in different spaces and different transitions, and then you can be your own prime, which is a big enabler. So alignment, and then you have to have that vehicle. You do have to have your own contract, and this is one way of doing it.
And how far out do you have to POM cycle for?
Oh, goodness gracious. Now, there is something in terms of speed. The government's not fast, and it is something expectations. We've been working for the vehicle to be put into place, years. And then all of a sudden, we have the next person that's calling, just calling, hey, we'd like to do a phase 3 SIBR with you. And next one, yeah, we want to do a phase 3. It's the first one's always the hardest, and it takes the longest. But there are different organizations that can move faster, and I like to say, when you pick your advisor when you go to PhD, you have to find someone you jive with, but you really had to find out how many PhDs have they done in the past, because you need to have the success. Same thing. How many have they done SIBR phase 3s before? That's a customer you want to start working with.
Yeah, when I say it's going to be a bloodbath, right? That's because most startups that are venture backed, they lose money as businesses, right? So when the music stops, they're dead. if you are bootstrapping and you're super deliberate and you never get out over your skis, that is, stay low, go slow, but, you maintain all of your equity and you can run all the traps at your own pace or the government's pace and you're fine, right? And you don't need to get big to succeed. You just need to carve out a niche where you're really crushing it and you're experts in the field. And then that works, right? Or you can do what we did where, 80% of our business is B2B, right? So that's how we dealt with that problem to counterbalance the government sales cycle and everything else. Other than that, though, you need to have scale to be treated fairly, to be treated fairly by the primes. So, I think you could kind of partner with the primes, but I'd be really leery because the primes will screw you over fast, right? They will mess with your timelines. They will say something's 2 weeks away, and it never is. And if you budget or hire against that, you're in real trouble. They will shortchange you at every opportunity. A third of the time, they will be building a parallel product to the one that you have and actively stealing your IP. And then use your NDA that you signed that you thought was innocuous to sue you and try and drive you out of business. These are common tactics by the primes. The primes, their business model, right? It does not matter which prime it is a butts in seats business model. They are selling man hours. That is what they do. Some of them have pockets of excellence, but overwhelmingly, they are trying to put as many people into the process as possible. You as an entrepreneur are trying to achieve efficiencies, which means that you are taking people out of the process, oil and water, right? And they will keep you away from the end user at the military, which you as a startup need to iterate against. So the primes will burn you to the ground. Be very, very careful working with the primes.
Incentivize different. They're a different incentive structure than you are, and you have to worry about any time when you align with a partner that has a different incentive structure with you. But amen.
Right, and that's not entirely different than most industries as you're breaking in as a disruptive technology. So I want to talk a little bit about culture and about mission.
Yeah, it's not like Google or Facebook play nice with small companies.
Right, exactly. This is not unique to defense. This is not unique to the public sector. Frankly, it's probably not even unique to highly regulated industries. This is a common thing. But as we talk about founders, growing teams, growing companies, especially a venture-backed company, if you're doing your job right, you're effectively doubling the size of your company year over year, maybe more. How do you manage culture, mission orientation, growing at hypergrowth without diluting that quality?
Well, growing your culture is growing your workforce, and that's difficult when you're trying to drive a product forward. There's a lot of, you can't have high turnover and actually have the knowledge for a highly technical product. So a small team, when you're small, losing people is very hard. However, you can't hold people like this. You got to kind of hold them like that, hold them close to them. And that's early on, because people feel like when you're stifled. So the culture, I was talking about culture. Well, we came from the military, right? So it all came from your core values. Our company has core values as integrity and team focus, and those two things matter and is communicated over and over and over again. And when we talk about integrity, we mean not just the same things we talk about in the Air Force, tell the truth, not lying. It also just means let your yeas be yay, your nays nay, and I don't knows mean I don't know. So there's honesty that has to be in the process so we can learn. You have to just reinforce that. And honestly, it's not just reinforcing it in terms of explaining it, but actually demonstrating it. The other one's the team focus, is making sure that people can have open communication up and down the food chain. That means you learn from the new guys and the senior guys can communicate also. Writing software, anything new, has a lot of uncertainty in it, and that can be very abrasive. So it's important to be able to have a team that can understand that you can get in each other's chili, and you will, and piss each other off, because you will, but be able to be on the same team. Just like in the military, we're going to fight together, we're going to be on the same team. So we have to establish that in the culture. And how we were able to do that ourselves was we went through last few years, as everyone else, COVID makes it very difficult to establish team when everyone's in their own world. Now, we do what you can do with remote telework and stuff, but what we have actually done is we brought back our workforce at a 60% time in the office so that when there's critical things for us to do, communicate, plan, piss each other off, it's done like adults across the room, and you can see when you hurt someone's feelings, which you will, and be able to grow. So I think that's the way we establish culture is actually establishing what our values are, and then providing an environment where those values can actually be lived out, because it's really hard to do that when you're completely separate. But at the same time, programming is not always a team exercise. You need to be able to lock yourself in the room too, and giving people the grace to be able to do that and say, hey, it's time, you need to work from home, you work from home. So that's how our culture works, and that's how we do it.
All right, so I almost wish there wasn't a camera on here, because the fact that there are veterans in the room, and many of you are entrepreneurs and don't have a lot of margin for failure, I'll speak very frankly, right, and not hedge what I'm saying at all. So I'm not going to get up here and say, you know, the company should be a family or what have you. I certainly think that there are some companies where that's the ideal approach. That ain't startup land, right? Startup land is ruthless. It is complex. It is ever-changing, and not everybody thrives in that environment. You are doing neither yourself nor the person who is not thriving in that environment, nor the people who are carrying them, if you do not get rid of them and get rid of them fast. You just need to do it. Now, as a startup CEO or founder, it feels like everybody's paying attention, and it's somehow a failure if you let people go, right? Or the company's going in the wrong direction, or people are going to think that you're running out of money or whatever else. 90% of the time, people think about themselves. And so, by and large, nobody's paying attention the way that you think they are. You just need to do it, right? And nobody ever is like, oh, I fired them too fast. It's always like, oh, why did I not take care of that the month before or the week before? That is missed opportunity cost for you and for your company. So if you are going to take on the burden of leadership in a startup, steel yourself for the hard decisions and make them. And do it yourself. Don't pass the buck, right? Do it yourself. If you don't think you can do that, you're not cut out to be a startup CEO or founder. That's some real talk for you.
You might have stole my last question here, Peter, but we're going to get to the last question so we can get to the announcement of the winner of the pitch competition today. If you're talking to yourself 5 or 10 years ago, or one of the founders or early stage operators in this room, what advice would you give yourself?
You get to go first with this one, because I may think about it.
Yeah. I hate the fact that society thinks we as veterans are a charity case, right? Or an equal opportunity class. Fuck that. We signed up in a time of war, right? We are the goddamn backbone of this country. The responsibility that we had, that our squad leaders had on the battlefield, is unmatched across the rest of society. We are the ones that are going to solve the hardest problems here in this country. And it is nothing compared to what we have been through. On our worst day, as a startup CEO, ain't nobody shooting at us, right? So if you have been through what a lot of us have been through, if you have the moral and ethical fortitude, you have the ability to bring it every day, right? And you recognize that there are harder things in life than hauling yourself out of bed at the crack of dawn and getting in and putting in the work. I mean, I think all of us, right, as we look at the challenges today, it's us who are going to solve them. So take care of each other, hire each other, right? Not because it's a goddamn charitable thing to do, but because we are the best of what America has to offer. That's what I'd say, and I've seen it every single day that I've been at Second Front.
That was very good. Well, when you have omnipresence of 5 years and you get to tell yourself something back, I would tell myself something that I need to be grateful, a lot more grateful 5 years ago, because I know where we're at right now, and I'm very grateful for where we're at right now. And they don't know this, and you get worried. There's so much stress as when you're going through this. You're stressing because you're having to work for yourself, work for your family, work for your people who are now working for you, and it's stressful. And but we've been blessed. We really have been. We've been making impacts. I am super proud where we're at right now. So I just have to be like, hey, dude, you have to be. This is part of the journey. Be happy on the journey, and the journey was actually good in retrospect.
Well said. Thank you, gentlemen.